Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever your circumstance and preference dictates. And welcome back to the SEA Workforce Hub webinar series on mentorship and registered apprenticeship. This is session 5 of a 6-part series. As always, I am joined by Dr. Kimberly Harris, who's a subject matter expert in diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. She'll be joining us for the second half of this presentation. And I'm Cori Di Biase. I'm a subject matter expert in working with veterans and others with significant barriers to employment. So welcome back. I'm very excited to be sharing this time with you as always. As I said, this is session 5. We're going to today we're really going to dive into what are the mechanisms of conducting an effective mentoring session? What can we be doing to support our mentors and support our mentees and ensure that these relationships are going to be strong, vibrant, and as supportive and valuable as possible for all concerned. So what we're going to be talking about today, as I said, that was our overall topic, but we're going to be talking about, first of all, how do we cultivate engagement between a mentor and a mentee? How do we ensure that that's a very strong relationship? What are our strategies that we might use to manage and overcome conflict, right? How are we ensuring that this shared sense of goals that we have are going to help us have some difficult conversations, which of course is a very big piece of all mentorship, but certainly mentorship and apprenticeship. How do we model empathy and a shared commitment to this purpose? And finally, how do we, as we come back to with every one of these sessions, how do we evaluate this aspect of mentorship? How do we understand the strength of an individual relationship and measure it? And of course, look for ways to improve that aspect of our program and to support even stronger and more vibrant relationships going forward based on the data and the information that we gather. So we're going to start with this ideas of cultivating engagement. And what we're going to be talking about as we go through these, I'm going to kind of just touch very briefly on a number of different subject matter areas, most of which you folks are already going to know about. But I just kind of want to talk about them through the lens of this idea of mentorship. And with the idea that, okay, these are things that we as professionals and as support staff and as leadership staff, we need to know this stuff very, very well. We're going to talk about, for example, trauma-informed communication and trauma-informed services and care. We should know those ideas pretty well, right? These are very important to the way we do our work. Now, every mentor that we work with doesn't need to be an expert in trauma-informed care or motivational interviewing or strengths-based discussion, whatever subject matter area we're in. However, we need to understand just how to deliver kind of nuggets of wisdom from these various very in-depth areas of thought. So we need to be able to distill some of these ideas down, convey them to mentors and mentees in a way that's really going to give them some tools to work with, give them some additional ability to support one another, additional ability to succeed within mentorship. So to begin, as I said, we've got a number of different strategies we're going to be talking about here. We're going to be talking about, how do we manage the environment, the medium, when and how do we use active listening? I mentioned trauma-informed communication. We talked about strengths-based communication. Of course, we're going to be talking about motivational interviewing. And then finally, and this is perhaps one that folks haven't heard of as much, but a neat little idea from some folks that I had the privilege of working with called hanging out with intent. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means and how it applies to mentorship. So our first question that we need to be asking ourselves in these situations, right, and this is different for every single mentorship relationship we're going to support, is how much are we going to involve ourselves? How much are we going to attempt to kind of tinker with what is fundamentally an organic relationship? Again, as we say right here, mentorship is a relationship. And when you have a relationship, that means you have at least 2 people, 2 individuals. Well, individuals are already extremely complex. If you've ever met one before, or tried to talk to one, or tried to understand one, or even been one yourself, and tried to understand yourself, you probably resonate with this notion that, yeah, human individuals are very, very complex, very unique creatures. When you put 2 of us together, the unique entity that emerges from that relationship, of course, that's going to be even more unique. It's going to have even more complexity. So the last thing that we want to do as folks who kind of manage a mentorship program is put so many restrictions and so many guidelines and so many rules in place. We're essentially limiting what is the core value of this, the organic aspect of this relationship and everything that it could end up meaning both to the mentor and to the mentee. So we don't want to limit that by coming in with a lot of rules and saying, this is what you're going to, this is when you're going to have these conversations, this is where, this is how, these are the techniques, blah, 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 blah. But as we said before, of course, we want to be able to be supportive. So the first thing we need to do is to be very careful about when and how we kind of offer this advice, to offer this support to folks. We know that some mentors and mentees will seek out advice and guidance, and some will not. We know that some will need advice and guidance, and some will not. And of course, we know that the overlapping pool there, the folks who need the guidance and the folks who seek the guidance, that might not be as overlapping a Venn diagram of folks as we'd hope, right? So we also need to learn how to kind of interject with some guidance and support and advice, even when it's not being asked for. But again, it is just as important for us to know when to stay out of the way and when to let this organic relationship take its own form. That's just as important as knowing when that we do need to interject, right? So we need to take somewhat of a careful hand with this and not over interject ourselves in these relationships. Things we all need to consider, and these are definitely things that, as we're first meeting with potential mentors, these are the kinds of things we'll want to talk about. But these are, again, all individual considerations. There are certain guidelines we can use, but we don't ever want to be we're not going to be telling people exactly when, exactly where, exactly how they're going to have these meetings, right? So some folks might really prefer, it might be more convenient to meet by phone or by kind of more of a virtual video kind of environment. Certainly, we know that meeting in person is going to have the highest possible value of being able to afford real connections. Hopefully, early on in someone's mentor relationship, they're going to be spending more time in person, but then maybe also using the phone or video chat or something like that. Whether or not we're doing some kind of an activity while we're engaged in this mentorship. You can go too far with that, right? I mean, if we've got folks doing bumper cars and barely really talking at all, well, okay, that's too much of an activity. If two folks really like to knit or something like that, there are times when we know that being engaged in an activity can actually give us some sense of comfort, give us something to do with our hands, give us some kind of activity that's going to maybe take a little bit of the pressure off what might seem at first to be kind of, I don't want to say a tense relationship, but in a relationship that, of course, as you're first getting to know each other, folks are going to be kind of looking to understand one another, trying very hard to fit in and to make all this to make this relationship work. But in that case, having that extra activity might just give someone a little bit of sense of ease and additional comfort here, right? We certainly know in terms of hard guidance that we can offer, communication and mentorship has to be dynamic and immediate. I'm not a big texting fan. I have thumbs that are about twice the size of the average phone. So texting for me is not a great or reliable medium. But of course, it is not dynamic. It is not immediate. It is not, you're not going to have an in-depth conversation about your feelings about something via text. So we would say to that's not going to work. We need people discuss having conversation. Of course, they can text one another on occasion with an immediate support need or a question or anything like that. But to say that our primary medium of communication is texting, obviously, we know that wouldn't work. Frequency and durations, that's going to also vary based on preferences, probably early on. We do want there to at least be some kind of set schedule in place so that folks, it's not just, well, maybe we'll see each other again in a few weeks, maybe not. Obviously, we want something scheduled. Probably early on, we want to say that a biweekly meeting might be great, maybe even more frequently to help build that connection and then sort of see where it goes from there after 3 months. Again, there are no hard and fast answers, best answers here, but we know we need some kind of guidance, some kind of policy to say, these are kind of the boundaries within which we should be thinking about this. We know we want set regular schedules. We know it's not going to be 5 minutes at a time. It's going to be an hour at a time, maybe more, maybe a little less. we're going to allow time for a real conversation. And then finally, our environments. We talked about this a bit, but we don't want people in a video arcade. We don't want people going to the movies together. And not there's anything wrong with going to the movies or going to a video arcade or playing bumper cars or anything else, but we want folks to be having conversations, right? And these are just the kind of things that we want to be advising on. But again, we also know there are activities that are great for that to help us, converse. Sometimes if we're fans of the same team, maybe we go watch a baseball game or something like that. But again, this is going to be very individualized, but all things that we want to be thinking about. As we think about this process of building rapport and engagement, of course, this is the foundation of all kind of the relationships, of course, but certainly in the mentorship relationship. Early on, of course, and again, this is true of pretty much any relationship, but we don't start the first mentorship meeting we're going to have with like an intense grilling of, okay, tell me everything about your personal history, tell me everything about your future, everything about your goals. Probably going to start light, right? We're going to encourage our mentors to kind of let the process unfold a little more naturally. We're going to start just by some basic getting to know you, spending some time together. We're not going to start right out with a kind of in-depth assessment kind of thing. No, we're going to just kind of have a much more organic conversation. Important for a mentor to remember topics that always work, particularly with the mentee that always work with the mentee they're working with. Topics that we know we can raise that are going to presumably be positive, going to be connective. These can be, we can just goof about sports a little bit. We can talk about the weather. We can talk about a favorite hobby. We can talk about a niece or a nephew or a favorite pet. Anything that's going to be just a nice, presumably positive way to check in and connect, subject areas that we can always come back to. Of course, we want mentors to understand, and they should understand this to some extent, but we want them listening, quote unquote, listening to body language and tone as much as they're listening to the actual words that are being communicated. We want folks to be attuned to the notion like, okay, I see someone's comfort level dropping precipitously. I see them pulling away from me. I see them becoming more stiff, more standoffish, and I need to have some way to respond to that. So these are all things that we want to provide a little support to our mentors to just be mindful of those kinds of pieces. We can certainly use humor. Not to say I do it successfully. I'm a big fan of humor, whether I'm funny or not. But we all, of course, also need to be cautious, right? As we get to know folks pretty well, we sometimes know that we can establish a really kind of unique humor connection with them. But right off the bat, we don't know exactly what someone finds funny or what they take very seriously. We don't know all kinds of things about them. So of course, we want to be very cautious with humor at first and keep it, stick to our dad joke style humor to use what I think would be the best possible description of my humor, such as it is. And then finally, first of all, another important piece here, because this is a precedent setter that we need to advise our mentors on. Be careful how we engage with negative observations. And what I mean by that, if a mentee says to their mentor that, boy, they're really struggling working with their supervisor in this mentorship or in this registered apprenticeship scenario that they're in. And that's been a real challenge for them. Now, on the one hand, we don't just dismiss that and say, oh, no, I'm sure they're in the right, you're in the wrong, or don't worry about it, it'll work itself out. We want to take it seriously. However, what we don't want mentorship to become is a biweekly complaint section. Like, oh, well, this was terrible. Oh, Bob is up to his old tricks. He's doing more bad stuff. And I had to fix all of his work the other day. And Sharon, my supervisor, she did this. If that's what mentorship becomes, we've all been in those relationships that they start out with just kind of like you spend most of your time kind of grousing about stuff a little bit. And soon you're in this relationship that all you're doing is just rehearsing and regurgitating all this negative stuff. And it doesn't help anyone. It might serve some kind of short-term catharsis, but it's not going to ultimately feed into someone's success. We want to be very careful about that and advise our mentors on being careful there as well. Active listening. This is a primary thing, and this is a kind of core competency that you might want to include in as just a 15-20 minute piece of any training that you offer to mentors. need to remember first and foremost that listening is not a passive activity, not in mentorship, not again, really in any relationship. As you know, from any time you've been in a conversation with a friend or perhaps a significant other, and you find your mind wandering, and they realize your mind is wandering, well, they don't take too kindly to that, right? Understandably. So not only do we want to listen and put in all the effort that listening really requires, which it requires quite a bit, as you certainly well know. But we more than simply listening, as we say here, we want it to be unavoidably obvious that we're listening. We want it to be unmistakable that our entire attention is focused on this person. That means our posture. We're leaning a little bit forward, right? I mean, we're not looming. We're not doing like kind of intimidating someone, but we're clearly focused on them. We're leaning in a little bit. We're making eye contact. Our entire orientation is toward that person. We're not crossing our arms. We're not leaning back. We're open. We're very connective in the way we work with folks. Of course, there are exceptions. Some folks are not terribly comfortable maintaining eye contact in conversation. That, like, to me, that's not a terribly natural thing. Like I have to really focus to maintain eye contact with someone. And as we know, that might just end up being a little too intense, right? A full hour of Cori kind of staring at you, that's not gonna really up your sense of comfort, right? So we'll learn how to moderate these things and to convey that we are listening without making someone feel like they're in interrogation, but we definitely need to make it very clear to them that we are there. Of course, we prepare in advance, when I say we, in this case, I'm giving you advice that in turn you're going to be giving to your mentors. So we want to ensure that our mentors in advance that they're prepared to ask questions that are relevant, that reflect an understanding of who this individual is. Now, they might not know the individual that well to begin with, but they will build that up as they go along. Maybe at first they're asking more questions about the position, the company, the skills, the goals, all those kinds of things. But as we go along, of course, we should be able to reference very specific things that we're going to be asking questions about. Paraphrasing what we hear. This, to me, is the core, one of the best practices in active listening. When we repeat back to someone else what we've heard them say, not in their own words, we're not parroting, we are paraphrasing. We're saying, okay, this is what I heard you say. Am I getting it right? Am I hearing you? That might sound like someone could be offended by that and say, well, if you were listening, you would know. So, well, actually, no. If I'm trying to give someone my life story, there are going to be some times when they're going to require some clarification, right? And paraphrasing gives us the chance to, first of all, show we've been listening, because you can't paraphrase what someone just said without having listened to it in the first place. It gives us the chance to have the individual correct us if we are getting something wrong. But while also showing they don't have to say, no, Cori, you got that all wrong. You're making all these mistakes. I've offered the opportunity to say, now, am I getting this right? Am I hearing you correctly? Again, that just affirms our interest in this individual and our interest in being sure that we are understanding these things correctly. It can also help us redirect a conversation. This is if we've got someone who's kind of really talking and maybe going off on a bit of a tangent, maybe they're a little nervous, maybe they're talking about these things for the first time, or with someone they're not as familiar with. This gives us the opportunity to say, I'm sorry, if I can I wanted to make sure I got this one thing correct before you said this. And maybe that will get them back, will help that individual get back on track. That is also a very full technique when we're doing our intake and assessment and first getting to know the individuals we serve as well. Serves that the same purpose there. But remember, finally, we're going to keep coming back to this idea, and we should never let it go. The notion that because these are relationships, because these are individuals, all of this is unique. Like I said before, some people will not, like some people are perfectly comfortable with eye contact all the time. Some people not so much. Some people are going to want a more formal feeling, like, okay, we're sitting up straight, we're having a business meeting. People are going to be much more comfortable kind of sitting back and in a much more relaxed environment. There are no wrong answers here unless we're doing something that's going to damage the eventual value and solidity of this relationship. If something is interfering with the value of this mentorship relationship, then it's a problem. If not, then we're going to be pretty open-minded and let this relationship go where it will. talked a bit about this before. Now, this is an area where, active listening, I think it's perfectly reasonable that we could train a mentor on how to do some active listening, some best practices on that. We could do that in a very easy introductory session, not that big a deal. Trauma-informed care, which of course I say trauma-informed communication here, but that's rooted in the notion of trauma-informed care. It's a much more complicated field of study. However, it is one that we should all know something about. Hopefully, we know a fair amount about it based on how we work with and serve the folks we serve. And it allows us hopefully to pass on some important tidbits. Well, some of the tidbits, the way I would describe trauma-informed communication to a mentor, if they were totally unfamiliar with this, I would say that, first of all, it recognizes and respects how past experiences may alter an individual's perception of what is or is not safe. Now, that's a very bland way to put it, but of course, we know that trauma is essentially it is a traumatic event that occurred in the past, but that still is very much alive for us, but in our personal experience. It is not something that happened 5 years ago, 5 months ago, 5 days ago. It's something that is almost still happening to us now. And it's something that therefore colors the way we look at the world, right? And perfectly understandably so. If, for example, I'm a veteran who had served in Iraq and perhaps was wounded in that time. Anything that reminds me of that scenario, whether it's where I was or the time of day or the people I was with or the noises that are happening, any random association with that is going to be very hard, is going to quite possibly trigger some kind of traumatic response for me. And by the way, what that means when I say trigger a traumatic response, that can be as simple as saying someone just feels very, very uncomfortable. That someone is not able to sort of engage in this relationship the way they do because the level of anxiety that they're dealing with. Of course, our responses to trauma are just as different as our experiences of it. This is all very unique to every person experiencing it. But we certainly understand this is there as a possibility. So if we recognize that, okay, a past experience is going to change the way I view the world right now in the present, it's going to change the way I view what is or is not safe, what is or is not comfortable, all those kinds of things. So we need to recognize that and be very understanding that we want folks to be able to express to us what does feel comfortable to them, what does work for them. And then we understand further that accommodating past trauma is primarily, not exclusively, of course, I'm really oversimplifying here, but the two questions to me that always seem to matter most when we're talking about trauma is what should we be thinking about in terms of our environment? How do we ensure that we're in an environment that an individual feels is safe? Even if we know that this is as safe a place as we could possibly be, again, it's the perception of safety. And we, from the outside, don't necessarily know what an individual is going to perceive as safe or unsafe. But then it's a matter of environment. In that sense, it's also a matter of control. The number one answer that when someone is when we're trying to ensure that we are not going to re-traumatize someone, cause someone to have these to re-experience these traumatic experiences, well, we want to give them control. We want them to be able to control their own environment. We want them to be able to control how they interact with the world, where they are, what they're doing. Control is a great, it doesn't solve the problem, but it gives us a lot of leverage over the effects of trauma. So that's another piece that we want to exercise. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. But again, as I say here, and we already talked about this, so I won't linger on it. But again, to fully understand trauma-informed care, we're not asking that of our mentors. We need to understand it. We should understand it. But what we want to do is pass on some important nuggets, like considerations of environment, considerations of control. But here are some great examples of how this might reflect in a mentorship relationship. First of all, a mentee should have control over who they're paired with. I used the example before of a veteran who may have been wounded in combat, and of course, a traumatic experience could be associated with that very easily. And by the way, when I gave that example, I positioned myself as that person. Just a reminder, as I try always to do, that is a hypothetical. I myself am not a veteran. I don't want to lay claim to that when I don't deserve it, but just wanted to be clear on that. We also know if someone has experienced abuse or trauma in a past relationship. Well, if for any reason I remind someone of that past relationship, then I'm a bad fit for them as a mentor. It just like right out of the gate. Doesn't matter who I am, doesn't matter what my intentions are, doesn't matter what my hopes are. Obviously, I know that I'm a perfectly safe person to be around, but that's not the question. That's not what we're worried about here. We're worried about ensuring that anyone who is engaged in these relationships can exercise the control they need to get the match that they're going to need. The mentee, of course, we want them to be able to further control most or all aspects of the environment in which mentoring occurs. Again, we have limitations. We're not going to an arcade. We're not going to watch a movie, but within reason, we're not going to put someone in a position where like, no, I'm sorry, we have to go to this one particular coffee shop. I know you don't like it because it's so crowded. I know you don't like it because it's noisy. I know you're really uncomfortable there, but we have to go there. And of course not. We're not going to ever put that kind of dictate on someone's experience. Finally, of course, we want to and we need to ensure that our mentors are encouraging the mentee to express any kind of concerns they have, any kind of discomfort they have. They don't need to give a reason. That's another thing here. We can't when we're talking about trauma-informed communication, trauma-informed care, we're not kind of putting gatekeeper locks on someone's choices. We're not saying, okay, we can go to a different environment, that's fine, but you have to tell me why. You have to explain why. Well, maybe explaining why would be a very difficult thing for someone to do. We're going to say, you know what, we understand this. We're going to adjust to this. This is no problem. Same thing with the mentor-mentee match. Now we know if a mentee rather, we've tried 5 different mentor matches and it's just never working out. The mentee is never satisfied. Okay, maybe there's a different issue at work and we need to spend a little more time understanding what it is. But when it's on his first match, and a mentee says like, no, I'm sorry, I'm just not terribly comfortable with Cori. Fine, no questions asked. We're going to say we can arrange a different match. That is not a problem at all. Content and environment. We definitely want our mentors to understand the notion of re-traumatization. This is essentially when we re-experience trauma, not when we have a memory of it, but when we are having an actual traumatic response to what should not be a traumatic experience because of one of these past traumatic experiences we've had. We need our mentors to understand what could cause that. And first of all, one of the things that can cause that is by kind of demanding that someone retell their story again and again and again. That is not cathartic to talk about a traumatic experience. It's very difficult. It is in almost every case, it is inviting or it is re-traumatization of a sort. So we want to be very careful about how much we're asking of folks in that regard. Certainly, certain topic areas, certain areas of conversation would potentially compel re-traumatization. We're not going to know what each of those topics is for any given mentee we support, but we should a mentor should have some sense of this, some sense of what this all means. And mentors finally need to know to honor the mentee's expressed preference for environment. So we're being guided by the mentee's responses, but we also know, and I mean, this would be true for a lot of different reasons, but certainly through the lens of thinking about traumatic responses, we're going to avoid loud environments, crowded environments, dark environments, isolated environments. I mean, we just know we're going to cross those off the list, and then we're going to learn more about what makes the person comfortable or uncomfortable going forward. For more information on this, I can't recommend highly enough. I think pretty much everything I've learned about trauma and trauma-informed services on the theoretical level has been from the folks at the University of Buffalo, I believe School of Social Work. But if you do trauma-informed Buffalo, which sounds like a strange Buffalo, but if you do trauma-informed University of Buffalo Google search, you'll find some great information, both really in-depth stuff for you and your staff and some much more introductory level stuff that would be great for the mentors you are working with. So highly recommend that for sure. Strengths-based communication. This is not as complex, but definitely a good one to convey to folks. And we might also hear about strengths-based service delivery, a strengths-based planning, strengths-based assessment, all this, a very similar idea. This is very much a question of attitude, the attitude that we bring with us into these interactions. When I'm interacting with a mentee or with anyone, do I assume that they are fundamentally competent and perhaps nascently, potentially excellent? Am I talking to someone who could really change the world in a positive way, or am I talking to someone who's more of a like, well, yeah, they're going to need a lot of support. You know, we're going to do what we can to get them through this, but there are going to be a lot of challenges for them. I mean, again, a question of attitude. Are we seeing the best of someone's strengths, or are we anticipating weaknesses and needs and other things that are going to need to be compensated for? This derives from a place of empathy and resonance. I mean, this is some golden rule stuff, right? In the same way that, of course, in any given interaction, we want people to assume that we're competent, right? We want people to assume that, hey, heck, we might even be excellent if you give us the chance and you really let us get rolling. We would want all of that. We would not want people to kind of be looking at us as like, well, there's Cori again. We got to make sure that we don't give Cori the opportunity to cause any problems. We know, Cori might do this or Cori might do that. We know what it's like to have people assume those kinds of things about us, and we want to be very certain that our mentors are not even presumably unintentionally conveying that kind of what we would call a deficit-based attitude towards the folks that they're going to serve. Now, one thing that we can do to help us evaluate this, I just throw out one example here. We might consider asking about, and do this in the abstract, maybe not talk about it in relationship to a given individual because we don't want to disclose personal information. But we could ask someone, like, have you ever worked with veterans before, for example? And we know some folks have very clear idea, like I've done a lot of work with veterans, or maybe they haven't, but they also understand, like, okay, these are folks with these experiences. There's a lot of competency and leadership skills and a lot of excellence that comes out of that military experience that folks have. But we might also hear someone else say, well, I know that, someone coming out of the military, they're probably just used to following orders, or, they're not going to be very creative. They're not going to be self-starters. You're going to have to tell them how to do everything because they never, again, all those things, we know those things aren't true. But if you ask me about veterans, and that's how I talk about a veteran, you might want to reconsider pairing me up with a veteran, because we know that is not obviously a strengths-based attitude. We could do that just as well. My example here is for folks in reentry, folks who've been involved in the justice system, perhaps been incarcerated, coming out of that system. All we would have to do is really ask someone, so have you ever worked with someone in reentry? Have you ever, is this part of your experience? If we get them talking about folks in reentry, we're going to know pretty quickly what their attitudes are. And we don't necessarily need to go through a process of confronting and overcoming attitudes right out of the gate. But what we do need to do is be cognizant of them. Yes, probably find, put a plan in place for, okay, how do we get Cori some better education, better information on veterans? So going forward, it'll help him, it'll help the veterans he works with, all these kinds of things. But in the immediate term, we're probably not going to make that the job of a mentee to confront that. We're going to just realign that connection so that maybe Cori, who doesn't have the clearest thoughts on veterans, maybe we're going to make sure that he's not immediately paired with a veteran. Let's get in some examples of this strength-based examples. Some very simple questions and observations that we can put in both a deficit-based and a strength-based way. So if I were to ask my colleague, Dr. Harris, why is doing these webinars so hard for you? Well, really, you're really struggling, obviously. Now, we know that's a silly example because we've all seen Dr. Harris at work, and we know she does not struggle in the slightest to do a great presentation. But if I were to ask that, I mean, the tone, the attitude behind that question, whatever my intentions are, the attitude is so clear. A different question I can ask is, hey, what would make you more comfortable with this? What would make you, is there anything about presenting on a webinar that you're just not that fond of, that you think you would be more comfortable with this if you had training or support or anything else? Totally different question. It's the same question in a way. It's the same question. Perhaps I intend it to be the same question, but asking it in a strengths-based way, I can ask, how do you need some assistance? Do you need some support? Without saying, wow, Sure looks like you need some support. Now how can I help you? Right? Two very different attitudes that we're coming in with. I might say, hey, make sure you finish that classwork by the due date. Okay, well, thank you. For very for keeping track of that stuff there. Or I might just say something much more empowering. And I said, so what's your plan? Do you have a schedule for how you're going to complete the classwork? Are you feeling comfortable with that? Is that all working out? Again, puts the agency back. It doesn't make me sound like a scolding school marm, and it puts the agency, the control back with the individual to say, hey, listen, I know you're going to do this. We know this is going to get done. Just give me a sense of what your plans are and what support you need, and we'll figure it out. It'll be great. Of course, last one here. Boy, if that had been me, I'd have handled that situation totally differently than what you just did. Okay, not very positive, right? That's pretty deficit based. But what we can ask instead, can you describe what was going on in that situation from your perspective? How did you see that? Let me understand what you're bringing to the table, where you're at, and then from there, we can do better. We can proceed from your perspective rather than proceeding from my assumptions and my judgment. Again, just some examples there, but very, very important stuff to keep in mind. Excuse me, folks. Important stuff to keep in mind in terms of how we're going to engage with and work with our mentors and mentees. Now, motivational interviewing. This one is, I said before, trauma-informed services and care. That's very complex. Motivational interviewing is, to me, exponentially more complex than trauma-informed services. That's just to me. The point here is, by no means are we expecting our mentors to be master motivational interviewers. We might not even raise this stuff early on in supporting a mentor, but maybe it's something that eventually we would talk with them about just in terms of some additional support. So let's talk about this on just the most basic level. And if folks who are practitioners in this, who are listening to this, are going to say, yeah, that was a pretty simple way you just described it, Cori. And I understand that we are not going in depth with this. We're just kind of presenting the basics here. The first premise of motivational interviewing, and this is true in everything, the mentee is in the lead. The mentee defines their goals. The mentee defines the specific goals of this process. Now, they're getting support and guidance from staff, the mentor, and everybody else, but the goal has to be the goal of the mentee. The goal has to be the goal of the career seeker, right? If you tell me what my career goals are and then kind of push me in that direction, we know we're getting ready for failure, right? Because I need to be the one motivated by these goals. So what we do in motivational interviewing there is we say, first of all, okay, we're going to clarify these goals. And that's an important thing to do in mentorship regardless. We want to know where this mentee is going and how we can be supportive. So this is a very natural place to start. Let's establish these goals, make sure they are the goals of the mentee, that the mentee is holding the reins in this process. But what we do in motivational interviewing is when we see behaviors on the part of the individual that are actually moving them away from their goal, from the goal that they stated. That's when we can say, we can begin by clarifying what those goals are. And then we would maybe ask someone like, okay, help me understand the effect. Is this behavior that you're currently exhibiting, is that going to help you achieve this goal, or is that going to present complications in terms of achieving that goal? This is something motivational interviewing was fundamentally developed in response to substance use and to other kind of habitual problems that folks experience, challenges folks experience, but that are rooted fundamentally in their own behavior. So we might ask someone who struggles with substance use, how is there continuing to engage? Like, okay, they said they went out, were kind of late last night, so that's why you're really tired this morning. Do you think that going out late on a Wednesday night and partying with the boys is that a good way to help you get toward this goal of reconnecting with your daughter, with whom you currently don't have a custody relationship? Is that going to help you do that? And even the way I'm saying it sounds like we're kind of loading this up with the obvious judgment that, of course, it isn't. The thing is here that when we're going through this motivational interviewing with someone, again, if we're talking about or issues related to addiction and other kind of habitual challenges that someone might be a part of, it can be very hard, of course, to break ourselves out of the mold of those habits. Anyone who has worked with folks with substance-related issues, anyone who has themselves experienced issues in relation to substances, you understand how deeply entwined that motivation toward those quote unquote bad habits and bad choices can be. So what we're looking to do as we develop this is really both identify discrepancies and get the individual, more importantly, we want the individual to identify for themselves discrepancies between their behavior and their goals. So we want the mentor to say, geez, I don't think that going out late on a Wednesday night is going to help me toward my goal of getting a career, getting stable housing, and being able to reconnect with my daughter and get a new custody relationship going there. And the goal here, and I said cultivating ambivalence on that last slide. We talk about identifying discrepancies. This is where, again, we're trying to draw out areas where the mentee's behavior is actually working against their own goals. But again, we want to remember our strengths-based approach. We don't just tell the mentee, like, wow, okay, you can't be doing stuff like that and think that you're going to get visitation rights back with your daughter or get shared custody back of your daughter. You're not going to be able to do that. We can't take that approach, right? That is just going to shut someone down and say, all right, they're against me. Now, I'm not saying this is a rational response, but we simply know this is the response that will come. If we're lecturing someone, if we're telling them that they're failing, all we're doing is adding more challenges to their plate, right? What we want to do is ask them questions and honestly ask, like, so do you believe that you can do these two, that you can go out late on a Wednesday night, but still meet these goals? Is this helping you meet these goals? And what we're really hoping for, again, when we're talking about these deeply ingrained habits that we're trying to support someone in overcoming, really what we're looking for is the moment when the individual says, I don't know, I guess maybe it doesn't. I guess maybe that I might be causing myself some real problems here in terms of the way I'm acting. And that getting to that point of saying, I don't know, there might be a problem here, just getting to that point, that is almost the goal of motivational interviewing. It is a very intensive, very slow process. But again, for folks who are going to be working with, if your mentor is working with someone who might be confronting some of these issues and wanting to do a better job in supporting them, maybe this is an area where they can dig in and start to understand some of these techniques. Again, we do not imagine that a mentor is going to become a master motivational interviewer. We do hope that we can distill some ideas from this field of study, this extremely intense, extremely accomplished field of study, and to give someone some tools that they can then work with in support of the mentees they serve. The last one here, after all those other ones, as I was kind of thinking about this, I remembered an old joke that back in school when I did some acting, there was always a theater joke that I was very fond of. You can imagine a director and an actor, and the director saying, "Okay, what I want you to do is you got to say that line much more slowly, but I also need you to have a slightly higher pitch in your voice, but also make it a little gravelly, like your voice is kind of straining a little bit. Also, tip your head up a little, like." On and on and on, direction after direction, so that you're managing every single motion that this actor might be doing. But at the very last thing that the director says, but most of all, natural, right? Just go out there and enjoy yourself. Just follow your muse and do whatever you're going to do. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, for all these other tools that we might want to share with someone, we do need them to just go out there and act natural, right? And to conduct a relationship in the way that they would, without second guessing themselves and thinking about every interaction. We want this to be natural and organic. This is first and foremost a relationship. If we're going to try and sort of overscript the process, it's going to threaten what makes it organic, natural, and genuinely effective. we need to remind mentors that they don't need to actively steer these relationships. That this is something they're going to just kind of let this relationship unfold as it will. It is not on them to turn this relationship, or certainly to turn the mentee into any given thing. We're letting this kind of organically take its course, but we're also understanding some of the possible challenges that we might get hit with along the way. Um, uh, and then finally, when in doubt, what we want a mentee to do is to focus on building a connection with and learning about and from the mentee. That's the bottom line. We want that flow of information. We want that flow of connection. Now, there are even going to be, excuse me, folks, again. Now, there are going to be instances where someone might need to make a choice between, like, wow, to continue to support and say the mentee in this situation. I actually really don't agree with what they're doing. I'm not comfortable with it. So this is not as simple as just saying, well, don't worry about it. Just kind of follow the mentee's lead. We know it's not that simple, but we also know that fundamentally, basically, this is a relationship between two adults. The mentor is not there to change or direct or give orders to the mentee. They're there to develop a relationship with them. And we need, most of all, to ensure mentors of that, so that they don't feel the need to over-script and over-manipulate the situation they're in. By the way, this notion of hanging out with intent, it's almost like an assessment strategy that was developed by a group of folks called Griffin Hammis and Associates, really interesting thinkers in terms of the way we assess and, more importantly, begin to understand folks we serve. And they point out that sometimes at the end of the day, we need to set aside all of our formal processes, all of our forms, all of our bureaucracy, all of our meetings, and just kind of sit and spend some time with someone and see where that takes us. Much like active listening, the activity is probably mostly going on under the surface, but this is very intentional. This is very thoughtful. This time we're spending. We're not just kind of hanging out staring at the wall, but at times we do need to back off a little bit and just let things be and develop as they will. And we need to make sure that mentors understand that they should be doing that as well, not trying to over control this entire scenario. And now, yes, indeed, I would like to introduce my esteemed colleague, Dr. Kimberly Harris, who is going to take things over from here and start us off talking about managing and overcoming conflict. Dr. Harris, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Cori. As always, you have set us up so beautifully for the remainder of this conversation. You know, when I think about all that Cori shared, building rapport and engagement, active listening, knowing and understanding mentee context and background and perspectives, and grounding on common ground. You know, these are all of this is the foundation, right, that is needed to help to navigate the pathway to a successful mentor-mentee relationship. And it is that shored up foundation that will ensure that when we arrive at those issues where we are at an impasse, where we are at a disagreement, where we are dealing with issues of conflict, that we've laid foundation to be able to navigate that pathway. And so what we're going to talk about for the remainder of our time together is thinking about what strategies that we can employ to do just that, to overcome conflict, keeping in mind that when we think about all that's been discussed and where we are now in the process, I want to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Forgive me for that little bit of a blip. It's called being human. As we think about what does it mean to navigate this pathway as we overcome conflict, we have to first know that, you know, we've laid a foundation to help us in that process. And also to keep in mind that we're not running from or toward conflict. We're acknowledging that conflict will come up. As Cori said earlier, we're talking about adults. We're talking about human beings, whether they be adults or not. But we're talking about human beings who are adults, who have patterns, behavior, backgrounds, a backstory. And all of those things inform how we enter into this role of relationship as mentee and mentor. Cori talked about the trauma of being a vet, that can occur as an active serving military person transitioning into the status of a veteran, right? Bringing that story, that backstory with you. Other traumas, right, that we can bring into the workplace from whatever our walk and our journey has been. We have spent that time talking about grounding on the why. And now we're going to talk a little bit about navigating the how. How do we navigate and how do we manage conflict? We first have to think about the roles that a mentor and a mentee have, being a mentor, all of the things that we talked about, the crucial role of a mentor. Part of that role is being a critical friend. What does it mean to be a critical friend? We're talking about engaging in honest feedback. We're talking about active listening and probing questions. We're talking about focusing on improvement and positive reinforcement, holding space, safe space to be vulnerable, to acknowledge that mistakes are going to happen. There are going to be zones of not knowing, right, that the mentee will enter into. And also, too, the anxiety that may come from facing a challenge and not sure initially how to navigate it. So that means that there's also the role of holding brave space, being in a position where part of the role of being a critical friend to a mentee is also letting them know that part of growth is knowing that there are going to be moments where we're less than stellar, especially as we talk about the pathway from apprentice to journey person to a master trades or skilled person in whatever sector and industry that we're talking about. So we have to start with that acknowledgement and grounding on that. And then, kind of spending some more time thinking about this, being a critical friend, being a mentor, operating from a strength-based posture. It also means that it's going to be a holistic relationship where we are focusing on outcomes-led approaches, making sure that we really start with what I always tell my students and my clients, the end in mind. What are the outcomes that brought the mentee into this space? The ultimate outcome is to be a master skilled person in this particular industry, in this particular trade. And then also the mentor coming into this space committed to helping in that process. For the sake of a robust and healthy organization, a profitable company, all the things. So grounding and revisiting on that why. So, and taking that why and breaking it down to this mentor-mentee relationship, understanding the mentee and getting to know them, cultivating that space of trust that helps to be able to relay information that may not always be desired, but it's necessary. Critical feedback, walking alongside a mentee as they navigate challenge, and also acknowledging that not every challenge will be an artifact of the actual job that's being done. It may be the challenge of integrating into a corporate or a departmental or divisional culture, understanding how those things are playing out and being able to offer support and insight and perspective from one's role as a critical friend who's also a mentor. So those are all the things. So those are definitely things that are top of mind when we're thinking about this role and what it means to be this critical friend, this mentor, operating in this strength-based, solution-focused way. So definitely, that holistic approach of connecting the ultimate why to the mentee's why, to understanding and respecting and seeing that mentee showing up with their lived experience, their backstory, and letting them know that you are going to acknowledge, respect, and hold space for that story and who they are. And also the other part of it, which we sometimes don't think about, is cultivating the relationship and space where the mentee can also do that for you as the mentor. So it's definitely a bi-directional relationship. both, we have to feel safe to share, to hear, to hold information, and knowing that you can be trusted with that information. And as Cori talked about, and I love the examples that he lifted up, sometimes we learn best by story. Sometimes we learn best by, as Cori said, not disclosing and just for the sake of identifying and, as we would say, getting into someone's business, but to really know that some of the challenges that a mentor may face, some of the challenges that a mentee, I'm sorry, may face, and some of the challenges that a mentor may encounter in helping that mentee navigate that space, they will probably not be unique challenges. They probably will not be the first time. So cultivating a space, holding space for individuals to come together and talk and share and be safe and feel safe in sharing what they've experienced, how these particular interactions and engagements are sitting with them, and what does that remind you of? What does that make you think of? These are things that are definitely essential and helpful. And they'll enter and show up to varying degrees. Every relationship, every exchange is not going to be the same. But if the through line of holding space for vulnerability, knowing that I can trust my mentor with my truth, and they in turn can trust me. Those are the common through lines that we definitely want to see across the mentor-mentee relationships. And those things become particularly crucial when we talk about instances where we're navigating conflict, because there will come these times where you're not seeing the situation in the same way. But if we've invested and built a bank of currency of trust, right, where we have relationship capital that we both invested into the relationship, we don't throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, because we can rely upon and recall and have a sense of security in the relationship that we are co-creating together. So it's also important to be mindful of what does this critical friend relationship mean in dollars and cents? What does it mean in terms of productivity in the company? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are operating, we're in a place of business. We're doing this for the sake of productivity, to be competitive, for going concern. So when we talk about what is it to approach, navigating and managing conflict and having a robust and healthy mentor-mentee relationship, and those elements that we draw upon in times of conflict, let's look at some of the numbers and some of the stats that speak to this. 67% of employees whose managers focused on their strengths reported being fully engaged in their work. And let's break down some of the why behind this. When I know that, and we all know that we are not going to always hit that ball out of the park. There are going to be times where on our watch, there is going to be a fail. And sometimes that is going to be an epic fail. But what is so valuable in those instances, and they will occur for everyone, how does management, how does a mentee, how does that trusted person acting in the role of a critical friend, or ultimately or hopefully acting in that role, how do they handle the failure? How do they handle the fall? And if it's leveraged in a way where a mentee can understand and appreciate that all of their good work of the past will not be negated over a mistake or a falling or a failure, it makes them feel safe to be creative within the guardrails, right? Take strategic and informed risks, and also lean more into their capability. And so that therefore, when mentees experience challenges that result in a failure, being in a situation and having the type of relationship with a mentor where they know that they can own the mistake, they are encouraged to learn from the mistake, and it's not a punitive environment, will down the road result in more productivity than if they feel as if they had to somehow either cover it up or apologize for it or they could not really engage in some deep thinking around the why. Because it's in those moments of breakdown or failure or falling short of the objective that you can then be reflective on the process, engage in course correction, and those discoveries around process improvement can be made that can then be implemented and inform increased productivity across the board. Also, it's important to keep in mind that high-performing work teams report nearly 6 times more positive feedback than average teams. So when we are, as Cori said, thinking about how do we give feedback? What is the tone and the tenor of the feedback? Do we also follow up with, thinking about what could have been done differently and encouragement? Those environments, it's not the whole notion of everybody gets a trophy for coming to practice, right? It's really, looking at the lessons and the learnings that can be yielded from all of the things that we do within the process and the operation, even if the ultimate lesson is we don't do that again, right? The why behind it and the understanding of that is so important. And it is crucial and critical in those early stages of the mentor-mentee relationship, especially when we're talking about in the life cycle of the apprenticeship, when we're talking about an apprentice who maybe yet has not transitioned into a journey person, or even a journey person who still has some more learning to go before they can really be a true master skills person. We know that inherent in that process, there are going to be instances of struggle, of shortcoming, that may be an artifact of just getting grounded in the work. That could be, an artifact of some of the things that Cori talked about, what we bring into the roles, all of the different positionalities that we hold. It is so important that part of being that critical friend to a mentee is holding space for that person to bring all of themselves into that space. Now, what does that mean? It means that I don't just, partition the parts of me as a veteran. And as Cori said, full disclosure, I am not. Definitely do not want to misrepresent myself in that way. But just saying all of what is experienced from that from that role and from that particular identity. We don't partition those things away. My role as a mom, my role as a woman, my role as a woman of color, all of those things, all of those positionalities, all of those identities are things that I bring with me into any position that I hold, any work that I do. And what is encouraged and really the ultimate yield is productivity for the company and for the organization is if I can be mindful and encouraged not to feel as if I have to partition or at least attempt to partition, but I can bring my full self into this role. My curiosity, my lived experience, my knowledge, skills, and abilities, my raw talent that needs to be polished and cultivated. And in that process, I will fall short. I will get guidance. I will get encouragement. I will get feedback. And I will have expectation to ultimately carry out the role that I've been brought into the organization to do. So, the importance and the value add of a critical friend to a mentee, it does have a dollars and cents bottom line proposition. Once again, 67% of employees whose managers focused on their strengths reported being fully engaged in their work. High-performing work teams, 6 times more positive feedback than average teams. So these are definitely things that we want to keep in mind. And also, we really want to consider some strategies to help us in this process. We want to, as I said before, think about that grounding on that why. So we want to establish those clear expectations up front, bringing my whole self, trauma, all the things that I bring, right, into my role, as we all do, and as Cori said, and I love how he lifted it up, we all bring some type of trauma. We know that trauma is an emotional injury that has not been attended to. And we all bring, that into some form or fashion of that into our work, into the workplace. that does not need to be and should not be put to the side, or basically the whole notion of just suck it up. We bring all of those things into the workplace, but it still does not absolve us of the expectation to do the work. Right? So we bring our total selves. We still have accountability. There's still expectation. So we want to establish clear expectations up front, going back to bringing that total self, who we are, how we engage, the synergistic yield of what happens when we enter into place and space within this working space. So we want to acknowledge emotions, right? We want to focus on solutions and not blame, which means that we have to hold space for people to stumble, to make discovery, to learn, to implement the learning, and course correct, right? We want to address the issues right away, though, right? Because we know that, avoidance is not, avoidance doesn't yield solution, and acting as if the thing that's in plain sight isn't there does not benefit the mentee, the mentor, or the work team, and can, in fact, reduce morale. So we definitely want to address the issues right away. We also want to, though, acknowledge and respect the power dynamics. And none of these things have to be in contention with one another, right? All of these things exist within the ecosystem, the place and space of the work environment in which we're showing up. So we have to be transparent. We have to call a thing, and we have to know that all of these things are existing in real time, right? And we create a strategy, a way to proceed, knowing that, as we said earlier, we're not running away from or toward conflict, but just as we craft a contingency plan for process, we also want to craft a contingency plan or acknowledge that conflict will happen, and know that we are compelled to hold space for that and manage that. So now that in thinking about, the ground and the foundation that we've cultivated with the mentor-mentee relationship itself, thinking about how do we navigate and manage conflict, when they arise. It's not a question of if, but when, and knowing that, conflict does not blow up the whole, operation. It's just part of relationship. We also want to talk about and think about, more, as we have been doing throughout this series, evaluating the role of evaluation in these relationships. So, thinking about evaluating individual mentor relationships. So some questions that we can ask and need to think about is, how has our process of mentor-mentee matching produced lasting and supportive relationships? Now, that is a question that we can then craft what we call indicators in many different ways. What does that look like for us? It's going to be a highly contextual thing. Thinking about this notion of lasting and supporting relationships, how are we defining that? Will that be, have we been able to transition from a short-term mentorship to a long-term to an ongoing? Have we cultivated other roles out of that mentorship relationship, like going from a mentor to a sponsor? However it's defined, however we, operationalize it, if you will, for our context, we need to have a way to be able to answer that question. Do we understand and accommodate for mentor-mentee preferences in the mentor relationship, communication preferences, how information is exchanged, where information is exchanged as appropriate? This is a place of work, so probably a good share that will happen at work. But can we incorporate things like a walking lunch? Can we, incorporate other modalities in the workplace to help with that exchange? So just things in that way to be thinking about. Do we know when a relationship is struggling or simply changing? How do we define struggle? Is it a growing pain, or is it really a point of contention that we need to address? Is there a correlation between the success and demographics in our mentorship program? So do we find that, our program is highly effective for only men, or highly effective for only white men, or highly effective for only, men of color or women of color or whatever, or some other stratified identity? It could be only individuals who are part of a particular type of apprenticeship initiative and not others. So are there correlations? Is it a generational demographic where, there's a mentoring approach that we've crafted and it really seems to resonate and be highly efficacious for Gen Xers or Gen Zers, but really not for older employees, or something in between. And there could be all types of patterns and things that we observe and see, but we need to be mindful. And remember in our earlier conversations toward the beginning of this series, where we talked about who are all the folks that even need to be present as we craft the questions, because these are the things that we need to be thinking about as well, because we want to mitigate blind spots so that as we ask the evaluation questions, they are the right ones. Another question that we also want to be thinking about is, what is our retention rate for mentors after a mentorship is ended, right? So, and we'll get into this conversation more in webinar 6, in our final webinar in this series. There are different types of mentorships by duration, and there are different things that those mentorships are good for. And, so, what type of mentorship is working best? What is what dosage, as we sometimes say in research and evaluation, is needed? Are there things that we need to tweak? So that's something else to be mindful of. How do mentorships that we perceive as strong or weak affect the mentee's overall outcomes, from performance to morale to some combination or some other outcome of interest for us? How does the nature of that mentorship, be it strong or weak, how is it affecting our mentees? Is it affecting attrition? Is it, informing a longer tenure at a particular within a particular division or at the company or overall? These are things that we definitely want to think about. And these are the things that, once again, starting with the end in mind, we don't craft these questions at the end. We craft these questions as we're also co-constructing the mentorship itself, because we want all of the folks who are going to be impacted, or as many of those folks who are going to be impacted by this mentor-mentee program, to be part of the crafting of the metrics and all of the other things that we will use to assess its efficacy. And also, from the standpoint of tools and methods, talking about assessing the efficacy, there are different tools and methods that we can leverage, from surveys, and typically when we're talking about any type of workplace survey, we want that anonymous. We want that de-identified. We want to know things like, what folks have to say. We want to stratify, as needed by division or department, but we want to untether identity from that so folks can give us as candid and as useful of information as possible. We also want to encourage and build into our measurement process informal check-ins with mentors and mentees, and have some way of capturing, what comes from those check-ins, whether it be, an email that we can, or some type of a questionnaire. So it is informal, but at the same time, we want a way of capturing the gems from those informal interactions. And it may be a situation where we're not looking to monitor and track, okay, how many times did you informally meet with your mentor or your mentee? It just may be a high-level conversation around, when you think about and reflect on those informal interactions and check-ins, what is the nature? What's been the cadence? How have you felt about them? What's come from those informal interactions? We want to, in our evaluation posture, have a sense of what's coming from that as well. Is that something that we want to promote? Is that something that we want to encourage and give mentor and mentees as much lane or leeway as they need to craft and cultivate a cadence and the type of interaction that works best for them? That might be the case, but we need to get a sense of what's being done and what works, so we can leverage that, we can learn from it, and we can pour that into, and we can turn that into, our mentor mentee 2.0, because we always want to leverage the learning to make the processes better. Exit interviews with mentor and mentees for sure are key opportunities to get nuggets of what worked, what didn't work. Why are you exiting? Is it a natural sunset from retirement, or, just, moving someplace else? Or was there something about the experience that did not fit well with you, that was such that made your working at this particular place in this capacity not sustainable for you? Those are things that we definitely want to know as well. Correlation of mentorship perceptions with other outcome data. So we want to triangulate. We want the perceptions from the mentors. We want data from employee evaluations. We want any other kinds of secondary administrative data as it pertains to our organization and our workplace. And we want to then compare, triangulate to see, do we see commonalities? Do we see things from one data source that can inform and flesh out what we're learning from another data source? And if there is contradiction, those things can even tell us things as well. And we definitely want to be attuned for that. So this wraps up the fifth of our 6 installment session. And what to expect in our last session, we'll be talking about what it looks like and how do we support the relationship of retention and growth. If we want this to grow, to scale out, to have radical roots, to be rooted in the very fiber of the organization, how do we implement practices and strategies that can help us with that? So we definitely want you to stay tuned for that as well. And as always, you can definitely contact the SCA Workforce Hub. You can go to our website. Please definitely check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X. And please also, what we encourage you with every wrap up of our conversation, be on the lookout for our newsletter as well, where we share all kinds of happenings, learnings, victories, and next steps as we do this amazing work that we enjoy so much. We thank you so much on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Cori Di Biase, and myself. We have enjoyed this conversation. We hope that you'll join us for session 6. And as always, be well.